Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about the latest tuning changes for Elemental Shaman come Tuesday. Last week, we got hit with a 5% Aura nerf and then another 10% Lightning Bolt nerf that pushed us even further into lava builds and already made Stormbringer feel a little bit shaky. Now we're getting another tuning pass, and while it's not just a flat nerf across the board, I wouldn't necessarily call it good news either, especially if you're a Stormbringer enjoyer like myself. But before we jump to the conclusions, let's break this down piece by piece, starting with the survivability changes. Shamans got overall a bit tankier, and that's a good thing. Brimming with Life now increases our stamina by 15% at 2 points, up from 10%, meaning we effectively got 5% more stamina, which is a decent health increase. Elemental Warding also now reduces our magic damage taken by 8%, up from 6%, which isn't much, but it's better than nothing. And finally, Nature's Guardian doubled, increasing from 20% healing to 40% healing, which, again, isn't crazy, but it's a nice little survivability boost. But even though all of these changes are nice improvements, it still doesn't address the main issue Shaman has, which is the fact that we still only have one effective defensive button in Astral Shift. Mage has Barrier and Ice Cold, Hunter has Survival of the Fittest and Turtle, and even Evoker has 2 charges of Obsidian Scales on a shorter cooldown than Astral Shift. I genuinely don't understand what Blizzard has against giving Shamans an actual answer to mechanics, but having only one defensive button on a 1.5 minute cooldown just isn't enough in a modern raid or dungeon setting compared to other classes that have 2 or maybe even 3. And yes, before anyone says it, I know we technically have Spirit Wolf for stacking damage reduction, but that is not the same thing as having a defensive button. It's similar to the issue Druids have with Bear Form costing globals, except Ghost Wolf is just factually worse. We have to sit in Ghost Wolf for an excessive amount of time to ramp into comparable damage reduction when we're looking at Bear Form, and in actual encounters it's just not realistic, and more importantly, it's not fun. To clarify, I'm not saying we're worse off than Druids, I'm just using it as a comparison. Either way, we're still overall tankier, which is a good thing, but we're still missing a second true defensive tool that almost every other class has, so don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking that this suddenly fixes Shaman's defensives. But now let's talk about why we're all here, the damage changes, because this is where things get a little bit messy. Last week, we got hit with a 5% overall Aura nerf and a 10% Lightning Bolt nerf. This already pushed us into lava builds and made Stormbringer feel less viable, but this week, the adjustments are a bit more targeted. Earthquake got buffed by 15%, Chain Lightning got nerfed by 15%, and Stormbringer's Tempest was changed to deal 40% additional damage to its primary target at the cost of dealing 20% less damage to its AoE targets. On paper, those numbers look pretty flat. 15% up, 15% down, 40% up, 20% down. It doesn't immediately scream massive nerf or shift. But what this might do is push our hero talent focus even further than it did last week. Earthquake and Chain Lightning are both massive damage contributors for both Farseer and Stormbringer. Both builds rely heavily on those spells, but the difference here between the two of them is proportion. In Farseer, Earthquake tends to make up a slightly larger share of overall damage compared to Chain Lightning, while in Stormbringer, the opposite is true. So when you buff Earthquake by 15% and nerf Chain Lightning by 15%, both builds feel it, but Stormbringer feels it just a little bit more. And that's the key takeaway here. Farseer benefits more from the Earthquake buff, and while it does still lose some damage from Chain Lightning nerf, that spell wasn't as dominant in the breakdown as it was for Stormbringer. Meanwhile, Stormbringer takes a more noticeable relative hit because Chain Lightning was a slightly larger proportion of damage compared to its Earthquakes. But then we layer the Tempest change on top of that, and it gets a bit more nuanced. Losing cleave damage absolutely hurts, but gaining 40% additional damage to the primary target isn't a small adjustment, that's a significant priority damage increase. Even though Stormbringer just lost some AoE throughput, it gained some decent focus prior damage, which traditionally Farseer is just better at. Considering we just took that Lightning Bolt nerf last week, the Tempest change might actually help offset some of that single target pressure we were feeling from Stormbringer. So this week's tuning change isn't necessarily a clean nerf or a clean buff, it's more of a redistribution of where our damage is coming from. Right now, I still lean towards Farseer as the safer recommendation. It still benefits more directly from the Earthquake buff, it's easier to execute, and it didn't take as proportionally a larger hit from the Chain Lightning nerf. But that Tempest change genuinely intrigues me. I'm not fully ready to walk back last week's take of just play Farseer, but I am retracting the idea that Stormbringer is completely dead until we get more testing and real log data. But at the end of the day, we are still very lava focused. None of this meaningfully changes our core talents in any way. It doesn't change our rotation, it doesn't suddenly create a new playstyle, we're still spending Maelstrom, still playing around Lava Burst, and still living in our Voltaic Blaze windows. The only real question now is which hero talent will end up being meta once all of this dust settles. And with Midnight being only about a week and a half away, I expect more tuning passes before everything locks in. And once Heroic Week hits, tuning is going to be happening much more frequently, and there's a real chance all of these changes will change again next week, and the week after that, and then probably the week after that. So for now, test both, keep an eye on logs, and don't overreact to any single week of changes. Because if there's one thing we've learned over the past 2 weeks, it's that Elemental is one tuning pass away from feeling completely different again. If you found this helpful, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next round of changes, because at this rate, we're going to have plenty to talk about. And let me know in the comments below what you're thinking so far. Are you going to stick with Farseer, are you going to change back to Stormbringer, or are you just sick of all this stuff and going to move to Mage? Let me know what you're thinking, because I'm curious where everyone is landing. But that's all I have for today, so as always, thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.